Hi, so this video is called Suicide Diaries, and it talks about just what the title says, suicide. Um, Suicide, basically, suicide is the tough one. Um, uh, Most people wonder, who've had a family member or a loved one die of suicide. Um, Common question is, why'd they do it? You're sitting in a church at a funeral, of a family member or a loved one, a friend. You'll ask yourself, why? Why did they do it? How could they have done it? How could they have chosen to take their own life? Yesterday, we attended the service of my brother. He killed himself. He took a gun and he shot himself in the head. And I know a lot of my friends and family members yesterday sat in the pew and they asked themselves, how could he do it? How could he put a gun to his head and pull the trigger? Not so for me. I understood fully why my brother did it. I understood because I've been there. Many years ago, I put the same gun that he used to kill himself to my head. The same loaded, cocked gun to my head. I walked away from it. Why am I alive and my brother's dead? Well, the answer was simple. I wasn't alone the night that I put a loaded gun to my head. The night that I put a loaded cocked pistol to my head, my cousin Jen was there. But, to be honest, I don't think that even my cousin Jen could have saved me that night. She was trying to talk me down, but I was determined to kill myself that night. I'd had enough. I'd been pushed to the edge. I didn't want to live. I was determined to cut that line. I didn't feel that there was anything left to live for. And what saved me that night was a simple phone call. Somebody called me that night that had never called me before. A guy that I liked called me and talked to me that night that had never called me before in my entire life. This individual had never talked to me. And that night, out of the blue, he calls to me and he talks to me. And he was able to talk me down. And while he was talking to me, my cousin got a hold of that gun and she made that gun disappear. And it disappeared for years until it turned up to kill my brother. God, I wish that gun had never shown back up again. But it did. So why? Why do people put loaded guns to their head? My brother, he chose to cut the line. There was no one there when he fired that gun into his head. He was in Reno, Nevada, in a hotel room, thousands of miles from his family. There was nobody there in the room with him that could talk him down. No last minute phone calls, no way to save his life. Over the years, the cocked gun to my head wasn't the only time that I tried to kill myself. When I was 17 years of age, I took a drug overdose and tried to kill myself with pills uh, because I didn't want to live. I was done with it. Now you ask yourself, why? Well, in my case, it was the pain. I couldn't endure the pain anymore. In my situation, as in my brother's situation, we lived with the family of abuse. My father was a pedophile. As you'll see if you watch any of my other videos, uh, I have a series of videos called the incest series of videos that talks about the abuse that we endured. Uh, my father was a pedophile. I was sexually abused. My mother was verbally and physically abusive, so I got it on both sides. Uh, I couldn't escape the pain. I couldn't endure the sexual abuse. I couldn't endure the physical and verbal abuse. which I'll say this, of all the things I endured, the verbal abuse was the most damaging. I couldn't endure it. The pain was never ending. And the more I endured, the more closed off and the more my spirit drifted away. And unlike the common perception, you don't just wake up one morning and decide, that's it, I don't want to live anymore. You know, you don't get out of bed one morning and say, yeah, I'm going to put a gun to my head and just end it all. It doesn't work that way, people. Suicide is not a split-second decision. You don't just decide to put a gun to your head and end it all. It doesn't work that way. It takes years to build up to that moment. It takes years of pain and degradation and misery to lose your hope. It takes losing all your hope. It takes losing your faith. It takes losing your belief that things are ever going to change. It takes being robbed of everything so that you have no hope, nothing to believe in. That you know without a shadow of doubt that there's no hope that things will ever improve. That this is it. This is your life. That you're going to be miserable for the rest of your life. That you're going to endure this pain for the rest of your life and it's never going to change. That you're going to be stuck in this existence for the rest of your life. It's only going to get worse. You're only going to suffer more. That the rest of your life is going to be suffering every second of every moment. And as a human being, you can only endure so much. You can only carry so much weight before you break. Human beings can only take so much without aid, without hope. You can't live without hope. No one can. In the case of my brother, you have to have faith. You have to believe in something. My brother didn't believe in anything. He was an atheist. He didn't believe in God. He didn't believe in a higher power. He had nothing to believe in. And that was his greatest problem. Because with all the misery in this world, with all the pain, with the fact that our lives royally suck, with all the abuse that you endure in this family, you have to have something to hold on to. You have to have a belief in a higher power, in a higher good, or there's no chance of surviving. And trust me, there's very little chance of surviving in this family. I mean, we suffer through severe depression in this family. It is very hard to survive day to day in this family. I know. I suffer from severe depression. It's a struggle. My sister suffers from depression. It's hard. It's a struggle. Our lives suck. They suck big time. And this family doesn't make it any easier. They make it as difficult as they can. They heap as much misery on you as they can. And the weight grows with every passing year, with no light at the end of the tunnel. It's overwhelming at times. And Daniel, he broke under the pressure. And Daniel, he had his share of issues. I mean, he had his share of stressors on top of that. Daniel did some really stupid things, and he had some really serious problems towards the end. Like my father, he inherited the family sickness of my father. He chose the path of a pedophile. He was charged and prosecuted for looking at and possessing child pornography and trading in child pornography. He was prosecuted and pled guilty in a federal court of law. And he was looking at 5 years in federal prison. Well, I think he was going to be charged with about 15, but he would have served 5 years in federal prison. And rather than do the 5 years, which, yeah, 5 years would have sucked, without a doubt, that was going to suck, but it was 5 years. My brother was in his 30s. He would have eventually gotten out. You know, he could have come back from it. With therapy. He'd never done anything to anybody. Yeah, I'm not saying that that's right. I'm not saying that that makes him a good guy. He definitely needed serious therapy. But with treatment and the fact that he'd never actually acted out on any of these sick desires, he might have had a chance at recovery. And had our family been different, had he had a more supportive environment, had he got the treatment that he needed, the psychiatric care that he needed, he might have made it through this. But between his problems with the law and what he dealt with his family, he just chose to cut that line. I think mainly because he had no faith. He didn't see any other future. He didn't see that it was going to get any better. So he chose to cut the line. He chose to end his life before it ever really got started. He was in his early 30s. He'd never really lived. He lived in a box. Never dated. Never got a job. He just lived in a box. I think that was half his problem. He never, God, he never even went out with a girl. I always wondered if he ever, how he could even decide what he desired, really desired, because he never even tried. I always thought that he kind of decided this path is a way to destroy himself. But that's why people choose this path. If you've ever wondered why a friend or family decided to take their lives, this is why. This is what drives them to do what they do. If you ever wanted to get inside their head, this is what they're thinking in those last moments. Okay? They're not thinking about punishing their family. They're not thinking about, giving a good old up yours to mom and dad. This isn't a way to pay you back, to make everybody suffer. People get angry at their family members because, of all the pain that they cause. People think how selfish this act was, that their loved one did this. Well, how selfish are family members that they didn't catch the warning signs that this was going to happen? Because this didn't happen overnight. Loved ones don't decide to do this overnight. This isn't a vendetta. There were warning signs. In the case of my brother could have been saved. I mean, if my mother had the money to save my brother, okay, Daniel needed therapy. Without a doubt, my brother needed therapy. And had my mother spent the money to get him the psychiatric help, we'd still have my brother. He just needed treatment. He needed to be in a facility that could have helped him. My mother spent $30,000 on Royal Caribbean cruises. She's taken my sister and I on 2 12-night Royal Caribbean cruises to Europe. We didn't need to go on those cruises. Yeah, it was nice. The cruises were fun. But she could have taken that $30,000 and one, got my brother a decent attorney, and two, got him the treatment he needed. And we'd still have my brother. And if I had my choice between the cruises and still having my brother, I'd take my brother. But this is my family. So you guys, the next time you're blaming your family member for choosing to be selfish bastards and killing themselves, I think you might want to take a little harder look at yourselves. Okay? Because if you'd made different choices, if you chose to maybe help your family member a little bit more, done things a little bit different, you might still have that family member. Because there were warning signs. Now, I guarantee, there are incidences where people do everything they can. I know there's some people that can't be saved. There's some situations where people have mental health disorders where you do everything you can and there's nothing you can do. People that get involved with drugs, where, their brain's just wired in such a way that there's no way to save them. And I understand. And that's a whole different road there. There are families that have been fighting with this kind of thing for years. They've done everything they can do. They've had their loved ones in and out of treatment, and there's just nothing they can do. And that's a road, that you can't win in that situation. But there are also people out there with family members and friends and stuff, like my brother, who are just ignored, who just ignore the warning signs, who, bury their heads in the sand until it's too late, who don't see the warning signs, or like my mom, bury their heads in the sand because they don't want to face the problems that their loved one had. When my mom found out what my brother was doing, she pretty much buried the head in the sand. She was like my brother. My brother didn't want to admit that he had a problem. He didn't want to admit that what he was doing was wrong. In his problem, in his defense, he blamed the entire legal system. The legal system was wrong, not him. His defense was that all males were like him, and that the legal system was corrupt, that he was being persecuted for being, and that all men were like him, but that the legal system was corrupted by Christianity. Okay, so he was being persecuted, like a victim of warfare. Oh my God! And my mother, she fed into this. She fed into this belief system. I could not believe it. It was unbelievable. Instead of getting him the help that he needed. So yes, people, this is why people commit suicide. It doesn't happen overnight. The next time you're sitting in a church pew, wondering how somebody could have done this, that's how. People lose hope. And in this society, suicide is going to become more and more prevalent because the people are losing faith. They're losing hope. This world is becoming a very miserable place. And people can only carry so much weight. People are losing their losing their jobs. Excuse me. People are losing their jobs. They're losing their ability to feed their families. Prices of food are going up. It's getting harder and harder to survive. And people are breaking under the stress. And there's only so much that a human can take. So when you're sitting in those pews wondering how this could have happened, just remember that we all are responsible in some small part for the choices that loved ones and family members make. And it isn't because the person that died was a selfish bastard. It may be because we were selfish bastards who didn't care about them.